and I want to do this one within a week from now, okay? Fucking, I'll run this in 2 days if I can find somebody to do this conversation. I want to do a hashtag force the vote debate. I want to get somebody that is in favor of forcing the vote on Medicare for all, and I want to get somebody that is opposed on forcing the vote for Medicare for all. There's a lot of talk right now over this conversation topic. Jimmy Dore, Kyle Kuklinski, the Bad Faith podcast, and then you've got like people like AOC and other people that are saying we shouldn't be forcing the vote. I'm super duper curious. Welcome to the first official episode of Destiny Moderation. We did a pilot show before, so I could kind of get a feel for the format. So if you obviously can't tell, today's topic is cash reparations for African Americans. So basically the debate is should the U.S. federal government or state governments in some capacity recompense African Americans for whatever reasons will be discussed here, or is this like not something that the government should do for whatever reasons, which will be discussed here. For this topic, I explicitly sought out to Black people to talk about it because it feels a little bit weird to have like men debating abortion or white people debating reparations, or, so I thought it would be a little bit more, I don't know if I would say tasteful. That sounds a little bit strange, but like a little bit more appropriate maybe to have two people discussing this topic that are actually like intimately affected by it. Coming into this debate, so I've decided that I will make my positions known to the chat on this, but first we're also going to do polls. I'm just kind of curious. We'll look for a before and after movement. Poll is simply asking, are you in favor of cash reparations for African Americans, or are you against cash reparations for African Americans? You can vote here. We'll do one of these before, one of these after. Because for me personally, and as most of the votes have come in, I will reveal that for me personally, I am almost undecided on this. I lean very, very, very slightly in favor of it based on what I've heard so far, but my position on that could be very easily moved in one way or another. I'm going to bring in my two master debaters, and then they're going to have an argument, and then at the end, we are going to just revisit the chat, see if the broad feelings have moved at all. Just as an introduction to this and to make sure that we understand what's going on, the way that this show works is basically I bring on two people to have a discussion / argument relating to a certain topic. I'm only here to do moderation. And when I say moderation, what I mean is that if I feel like the two people have exhausted a topic or aren't responding to or hitting each other's points well, I'll just kind of step in and say, I think he's trying to say this, we should respond to that, or we should move on from that. If people scream or shout at each other, I'm not really here to intervene there. I'm just trying to make sure that the argument stays on like a good course and that we're responding to each other's points well. We have at the bottom left our wonderful friend Trihex here, okay? Super Smash Brothers player, Mario Maker player, and all-around cool dude. And then on the right, we have one of our wonderful participants from the Georgia Canvassing Stuff, our politics / philosophy streamer / rage debater on Twitch, Ahrelevant. So you two are going to take it away. I think that for this, we'll probably start, I guess, lightly with the affirmative. Trihex can state why he thinks it would be important to have cash reparations, and then Ahrelevant, you can respond, and then we'll just kind of like follow the conversation like that, and I'll make sure the two of you guys kind of stay on point. Go for it.
Okay.
Hey. All right, well, first, I appreciate being introduced as a masturbator. I don't know if that was really the ultimate criteria that I qualify to be introduced as Destiny, but regardless, though, I guess we can move on from there.
Sure, go for it.
So you want to go ahead and start in here with whether or not we support or oppose?
Yeah, so just for Trihex, you think that cash reparations ought to be paid to the descendants of slaves in the United States. Why? What's like your first point for that, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So the first point for that is just, I guess we can go over here, just the acknowledgement that we need to do a course correction on all of the historical wrongs and oppression that's been inflicted upon Black people in the United States here for several centuries. Something needs to be done about it here, and the everlasting effects that have been like inflicted and endured by Black people are shown with the grotesque wealth inequality, socioeconomic factors that lead to disadvantages for many Black people all around here. Whether you look at discrimination, criminal justice enforcement, employment opportunities, and just open discrimination. So yeah, there's a lot we can look into to start to acknowledge that being the reality of what it is, and how reparations can be the start of the healing process from that point. Oh,
Okay.
I can go further here if you need me to, but I figure I want
Nope.
to like.
I
Okay.
think that's pretty good for me personally to be able to jump off of. I agree with pretty much everything that you said. However, the point of disagreement is probably that I don't think that direct cash reparations actually helps almost any of what you said there, almost at all. I would find that what would probably help significantly more would be investing in black businesses or investing inside of black schools, specifically, like instead of direct cash in hand, it would be more of infrastructure or the environment around black people's like the climate that black people live in. One of the reasons why I would cite the necessity for a more systemic or environmental all-around fix rather than direct cash reparations would be like citing rich black people and how they still face systemic discrimination and things like that. So even if we were to, let's say, give black people each $1 million apiece, it would make their lives substantially better, but it still wouldn't solve a lot of the problems that might cause, for instance, their children or what have you to be able to incur a lot of economic or societal stress.
Actually, it's interesting because I entertained and interpreted the question as, "Are you for direct cash reparations as a method of delivery, or nothing?" I wasn't aware we were able to actually, challenge the framing here and entertain community investment, because that's actually what I'm
Okay.
more excited about getting into than the logistics of how you would implement that compared to direct cash injection. But I would say that ultimately what I actually advocate for, since we already get to entertain dissecting the framing of the question altogether here in this debate, is a hybrid. I think that a hybrid of community investment and direct monetary injection would be the best way to approach that. You're not
Okay.
wrong in that the societal interpretation of black success and black wealth can still not solve the problems of prejudice and discrimination and other things like that. Um,
Hmm.
but we can elaborate more on some
Yeah.
of the structural specifics here. But I would definitely say that I'm not necessarily opposed to monetary injection because for a starting reason, the poverty floor in this country is really bad.
Hmm.
And if we
Hmm.
look at like the average income of like self-described black individuals, it's significantly worse than the white counterpart.
Hmm.
And the fact that that the amount of incarceration that currently happens in prisons with black people, despite how it's almost 40%, right, based off of
Hmm.
well, I think a very easily agreed statistic right there. 40% of incarceration in prisons is black people, yet black people only make up 12% of the population. There's a disproportionate amount of bad things or enforcement happening in certain areas here. So we definitely have a lot we need to look into here. And of course, maybe course correcting a lot of things like our cash bail bond system, the criminal justice reform, I'm sorry. And many other things like community investment all come into play here. But if we're going to agree about the severity of how bad it currently is for the most oppressed, I should say most, one of the most oppressed um, classifications of citizenship in USA as African Americans, then I'd say time is all the essence here. And I'm not entirely opposed to, in a similar parallel to the pandemic right now, getting that relief as immediately as possible.
Right.
Even taking, because for example, right, I'm sorry, forgive me, let me just
Nope.
do one
Go
more thing
ahead.
here. For example, here, if we entertain strictly community investment, and we're talking about
Hmm.
like, I don't know, logistical oversight and what could be 1 to 4 years before we see tangible
Yep.
implementation in certain areas. That is
Hmm.
one high school student's entire high school curriculum, where they weren't even able to do that. And just having the additional money to be able to kind of like make things happen, I think we can make a pretty big modern what's the word here? Modern application into the parallels of COVID right now.
Yep.
Getting more COVID relief 9 months ago, if it were even for just like a monthly UBI implementation, just to like get the relief we need to people as quickly as possible, because we understood the severity of COVID at that time, with this disruption to the economy and everything else here, would have made probably a lot of difference for a lot of people involved, and probably would have resulted in definitively less death. And the same way here, getting that immediate monetary relief to Black people, if we're admitting here the level of oppression is currently going on in this country for them, would also lead to definitively less suffering, possibly.
Okay, I don't disagree with anything that you just said for the most part at all. I only have a few questions to be able to springboard off of that. What if let's entertain an idea wherein which Black people were not ever like slaves or even systemically oppressed? Would you still advocate for, but they had the similar economic conditions to what they have right now? Would you still advocate for similar policy to what you just described for that group of people?
Would I advocate for African Americans to get reparations if they were not in the poverty state they're currently in right now?
Well,
Right?
technically, it wouldn't necessarily be reparations, but would you still, advocate for similar economic policy to what
What
you're describing if they had not gone through any kind of like systemic racism or anything like that?
so our relevance question is basically, let's say that there was a group of.
If I'm
Oh,
interpreting
shit.
this correctly here,
Wait,
yeah,
I'm sorry,
if
real
they-
quick.
if-
What a relevance question is that he's saying is that if there was some minority group in the United States that currently had the same like socioeconomic status as African Americans, would you be giving the exact same prescription for them as you are now for African Americans? Is there a difference? Like, does African Americans' history in the United States of slavery like have any special bearing here? Is essentially the question.
Right. So I get that's what I'm getting right there with that one. So the thing there is we have to agree here that the oppression African Americans feel in this country does stem ultimately from the byproducts of slavery being enforced. Slavery,
Sure.
3/5 human clause, electoral college enforcement, paywalls, being able to vote, paywalls to be able to have legal protections that the white folks had comparatively as well, and all the civil rights movements, the suffrage, the discrimination, and the cultural reinforced bigotry, and I would argue the non-normalization of Black success here. I think all of that stems from slavery, and therefore it's that is intrinsic to justifying reparations and the cash relief for Black people. If other minorities are in a similar boat, like on a socioeconomic factor, and they didn't go through that, it contextually requires for me to say, is it directly related to American policy? Because that's the whole thing. Like, United States had slavery for 80 something years before it was amended.
Let's assume that it wasn't due to directly American policy, that they were just economically destitute for not, I don't know what reason I could give that isn't necessarily economic. Maybe they just, I have no idea what I could possibly give. Perhaps discrimination from other groups online could put them inside of a depressive state. Maybe social pressure or social discrimination, not so much as a result of the government, but more as a result of the populace that fill the government. And they were economically destitute as a result.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I would say, specifically, would I be supporting reparations for a different minority if they were in a similar socioeconomic factor and didn't endure all the things Black people did? Not specifically, but also do note here that I'm generally a fan of lifting the poverty floor up and having, again, in my terminology here, I'm in the interest of a better functioning society, which generally would occur if you have a stronger quote unquote middle class and everyone's able to acquire a sustainable standard of living. So ultimately, if you're interested in things like human equality and less discrimination and lower crime, everyone being happy and being able to afford a universally agreed standard of living and not, again, live in poverty, check to check, and be, essentially having to endure the downfalls of how expensive it is to be poor. I would imagine here you wouldn't be seeing all these socioeconomic factors and statistics continue to definitively oppress Black people, much less other minorities too here. So in short, to recap here, I do support reparations or the cash injections for Black people because I can easily link that back to being they are where they are right now due to the byproducts that have resulted from slavery and after slavery, civil rights movements, etc. For other groups comparatively, reparations specifically, if they didn't go through an American specific reinforcement of oppression, no. But I do support systems that would help them get out of that similar socioeconomic factor. I don't think any individual minority or group should be at the level of poverty we're currently seeing experienced by like the bottom, whatever, half of the country, much less the bottom 10% of the country on an income level.
Okay. Then what kind of special, so let's assume you have a black person and another minority, this minority that we previously talked about that was not systemically discriminated against. What special advantages or perks would you give the black person as a result of your reparations argument, or your direct cash more specifically, because that's the point of contention? The direct cash benefits would you give the black person that you wouldn't give the other minority individual?
So, okay, great question here. How about, can we entertain the idea of like poor rural whites? Would you like that one?
Sure.
Okay. So let's say because I'm not derailing already here. Okay, so if we entertain poor rural whites comparatively out in like wherever like Nowheresville, Kentucky or something like that, right? The difference there where I think we would differ, or where I would differentiate comparatively here, is that ultimately what I truthfully advocate for is a hybrid of direct cash payments and community investment and things that would make society generally better. And I think one of those, like you're bringing up earlier, actually, is going back into investing into the creation of more Black-owned businesses. The reason why I would agree here that direct cash injections don't really solve the problems that we're bringing up right now about racial issues, societal problems, and general oppression is that, like, if you give everyone like a, are we allowed to curse here? Sorry about in case before I forget. Yeah, if we give everyone like a shitload and a fuckload of money, ultimately, everyone's going to just impulsively spend it on random consumerism trash. And ultimately, it will be money put into the black hand that eventually gets drowned out from consumerism and goes into all the money of, or all the hands of the white-owned businesses, in a broad overgeneralization, right? So it doesn't really solve the problems that go on with Black people because, sure, they were able to acquire material wealth on a short-term burst, but there's still not really a battle plan, a pathway, if you will, towards how we repair this fragmentation of generational success that we continue to see from on a macro picture of white folks and other races, and how Blacks continue to see the pipeline right to prisons in some cases here. So yeah, I do agree that the reckless, directionless injections just to right the wrongs, hey, you suffered enough, here's your suffering tax, call it a day, and shut up here, is directionless and not really effective. But again, to answer your question, I'm sorry, I'm derailing a lot here, or I'm getting long-winded. The difference is with Black people specifically compared to like comparatively poor white people is that I would make it I would think here a program to prioritize the creation of Black business is definitely something to look into here. So you could also offer the monetary injection, but also offer 0% interest business loans to Black people who would be open to creating Black-owned businesses, and ultimately try their best to like kind of create the landscape of like, had there not been all these decades of disadvantages for Black people to be able to get to the equal footing that we've seen in white America.
Just kind of a curious.
I can detail that further if you'd like to, but
kind of curious for this conversation. So I think something else that Ahrelevant is getting at. So let's say that Black people in the United States, or more specifically African Americans in the United States, were like occupying the same strata, the same economic areas as white people. Let's say that there was a similar percentage of African American and white people in poverty, in middle class and upper class. Let's say that it was more or less the exact same. If that was the case, would you support reparations for African Americans, or would you be opposed to it at that point?
Ooh, see, the problem there is it's so hard to entertain the hypothetical because like the context of how both classes or both races have been able to manage equal footing despite all the oppression to me seems weird, because it's like your scenario also. The other problem I have here, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm not answering a question with another question here, but it's like the problem with that scenario to entertain here is the fact that Black success is not normalized. That's the issue here, or that's like one of the issues here. Like representation certainly matters here, and I could actually bring here up an example if you wouldn't mind. Am I allowed to like I haven't answered your question yet here, but I do have a really good example I'd like to cite that would help reinforce my point about representation and the normalization of Black success in America. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm cool with that.
So for example, here we look at probably one of the more notable examples of reparations being distributed in forms of direct cash payment. We can go back here to the Japanese containment camps during World War II, right? Um, the initial act that happened under Reagan in 1988 for that, that legislation was done to execute those payments, those $20,000 to those 80,000 something Japanese Americans. That mostly happened because of the insistence of, at that time, 4 sitting Japanese American House members in Congress who pushed to get that expedited throughout Congress and then forwarded further into the Senate. So, like, because of the elected officials of like having a diverse pool of people who actually represent Congress here, you're able to see the interest of Japanese Americans expressed by how completely wrong the doings of those like completely racist and war bound hysteria of disrupting your entire life and losing your free will to relocate to a pretty shitty rundown containment camp because of the completely baseless fear that Japanese citizens in California might have been like radioing in on Japanese warships following Pearl Harbor. So yeah, representation certainly matters in that regard, and I just find it really hard to entertain the scenario that Black people would be equal in wealth and opportunity to white people without just exploring the context of how it even occurs.
Yeah, I guess so. The kind of the more pointed question is that when some people argue for reparations, the argument isn't necessarily centered on we need to help African American communities catch up, we need to invest in their infrastructure or schooling, or we need to do something to balance out like the representation or economic status between African Americans and white people. The argument sometimes I hear is more just, regardless of all of that, reparations should be paid because morally they are owed to the descendants of slaves, that these were payments that were specifically promised to and owed to people that were just never paid out. So hence the question of like, well, let's say that African Americans were caught up, would that still justify, I guess like the United States government for just kind of like backing off those payments, like, well, you're caught up now, like now you don't deserve the reparations or whatever, like you're doing okay now, I guess it's kind of like what the question was aimed at, or in terms of, I'm curious how you do that,
I can still answer that if you actually want me to.
Go.
I don't want to monopolize the microphone. I don't know if you like. Do you have something you want to hop in here first, Ahrelevant, before I?
No, I just pretty much had a hypothetical that would pretty much address exactly what Destiny was trying to get at. If you understand what he was saying there, go for it.
So, okay, even in this scenario, with that framing now, thank you for the elaboration there. I would still say I am not entirely opposed to reparations being distributed to Black people if they're on equal economic footing as the white class entirely, because the America we now know at this point was built upon an economic model that exploited the labor and time and generations of Black people. Like, so if you like literally we had a war over the Civil War, right? So it's like the founding of how the economy grew in the South is dependent upon slave labor because of the plantations, and it was so intrinsic to their success models that they fought over the shit to defend it continuously. So ultimately, that's like kind of like one of the ugly pillars of the foundation that we now know as modern American economics. Our U.S. dollar is so strong because, whatever, 2 centuries ago, the normalized, I own this many slaves. They work for me. They build my shit. They're a part of my capital. They're tradable, sellable, marketable, whatever I need to be here. Like the U.S. ultimately would not be where it is without the slave exploitation and slave labor. So that is still definitively a moral wrong that needs to be addressed in some way or another here. So I would still say, yes, to some degree, yeah, Black people still deserve some kind of a definitive action to show sincere apology and remembrance to never like fall back into this trade ever again here. Now, it could be argued here whether, like, if we're agreeing that was a wrong that should be righted, should it be all Black people, or should we determine only slave descendants or something like that? That's more of like a technical logistic issue. And then you can get into the concerns over the deficit because of how much money it would cost to even do at what worth, which we can all entertain if you'd like to here. But as long as as long as we're agreeing that slavery happened and it's fucked up, and it's like an American imposed wrong, much less say even a moral wrong, that someone is due to compensate for that wrong that's been done in the past. it's already completely abysmal that said slaves are already dead. They can't even have their lifetimes refunded, or be able to like have like a a send off before they perish. They're already dead. Not only are they dead, they're dead. Their descendants are dead, and we're talking about possibly as far back as 7 generations. We're going back to like 1776 here, if assuming that the average person lives 35 years relative to that time period. Yeah, so it's just like, yeah, we have a whole lot of wrong that we're very, very overdue to compensate here. So reparations don't sound too radical to me for being completely objective over how fucked up shit was even just 100 years ago in 1920s, much less how completely immoral it was back in the 1700s.
Okay. I would then ask a more extreme hypothetical. Let's assume a world where every single black person was a multimillionaire. Do you think that reparations would still be owed to black people?
It is so hard. Okay, your scenario of like common black multimillionaires where slavery happened.
Yeah. I know it's a weird hypothetical, but there's a reason why I'm asking it.
I'm sorry, I can't entertain the framing here because the context
Sure.
of how you arrive at that point is a kind of the whole thing here. It's
Okay.
not about I decline based off the rate, based off your income level. Like, I'm not saying you have to be this poor and this black to get reparations. I'm saying that a definitive wrong was performed several centuries ago, and debatably less severe wrongs, the denying of voting, the denying of being of legal protection on law equal to your fellow white man, the denying of, I mean, debatably here, interracial marriage was until 1967, if I recall correctly here. The numerous amounts of deaths and massacres that have happened, whether you look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, or there was a small town in Florida back in the 60s as well here, where just like whites came into the black majority town and just burned everything down to the ground over some bullshit. There's just so many scenarios here of like definitive wrongs that I don't think being wealthy automatically negates the wrong that was done.
Okay, no, that's exactly what you just said is all I was looking for. So if you agree with the idea that the economic or material conditions of, let's say, black people as a whole isn't necessarily a prerequisite, even if they have exorbitant amounts of wealth, I would just ask, is there anything in all of reality that could be done to be able to make you say that reparations is not owed to black people? Or is it just that simply by the fact that our ancestors went through, and depending on what we're talking about as well, even our grandparents with like Jim Crow and things like that, and possibly even our parents with some redlining situations, are by by the result of that given action that we are owed reparations intrinsically by nature? Is that what is the argument exactly?
Sorry, just to recap here, you're asking me under what situation would I oppose cash reparations, or are you asking me the minimum requirement?
More specifically, I'm trying to ascertain whether or not you believe that under any circumstance, reparations are owed. It doesn't matter the material conditions or societal conditions of black people. Reparations will always be owed because of past events.
As long as the action occurred, whether it be pre 14th Amendment, pre 13th Amendment. Wait, 13th Amendment. Sorry, I might be confusing wrong here. Trying to flex a little too hard right now. Pre 13th or before 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and onward were all implemented, and slavery was abolished in the United States here. As long as that occurred, that's a definitive wrong on even the basis of American point of view, much less again an objective moral one. So as long as that occurred, something needs to be done for that because of the definitive multi-generational damage that comes from the existence of that and the implied social stigma of that. So it doesn't matter how wealthy you are. I don't like this idea that like if you like you can just like outrich your way out of morality and or due punishment. To me, that's just like a load of BS there. So if you're looking for me to like give you the minimum spec that where slavery can occur, but people are well off enough to not deserve having reparations considered here, I'm not sure I can entertain that really. Is that what
So just to clarify Ahrelevant's position, because I'm trying to understand, because I understand you're asking Trihex a bunch of questions to get his position out. Ahrelevant, do you think it's possible that a certain group of people could be promised something, but then that group of people could be so successful that in spite of whatever they suffered due to the breaking of that promise, that at some point they would no longer be owed that promise? Do you think that's possible?
Potentially, absolutely, yeah. Because of the priority with which resources must be divided amongst a given entity. So if we entertain the idea of, let's say, a government, not necessarily a perfect parallel with this, but let's entertain the idea of a government that promised $5 grand to each individual that belonged to a group, but that group was a bunch of multimillionaires, and there are people that are starving. I would say fuck it. Listen, there's better ways to allocate those resources. It's unfortunate that might be the case, but there are better ways to allocate those resources, and that's what I would say. If we had non-finite resources, absolutely, give everybody whatever the hell they wanted, but that's just not the reality we live in.
So yeah. two points there. So one, are we doing? So are we now entertaining deficit concerns over?
Oh, we are.
Okay. So like, here's the problem here again, though. If we're going to entertain deficit concerns over how much money we need to allocate and spend for something that was this bad and wronged, something that's inhumane, dehumanizing, etc. People died. People were lynched.
Yep.
By the shitload here.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a concern over a deficit, over the money spent, is trivial because the deficit is only a concern of an economy that was made possible by the direct exploitation of their existence, time, and labor.
I agree.
Like, okay, so take away slaves from the equation and pay everyone a fair living wage, as you, the business owner, is going to be compensated as well here on equal treatment in terms. And suddenly, your I don't know, your GDP, your deficit, it's all irrelevant now. It's going to be a whole different model and tracking entirely over multi-centuries of this whole thing being implemented. So I don't know where you can give me that like money is more important than people when people were intrinsic to what the money is worth now.
Okay, so then would you, I mean, I feel like you already knew it's coming. Would you make that argument for us giving back all of the money that we have as an entire government to the Native Americans, who literally the only reason why this entire government is possible is on their land? So we should give back, it doesn't matter about deficit spending. We should just give them all of the money, right?
Well, to a certain degree, possibly. You're saying all the money? Like, clearly it's not it's not practical to implement. So now, okay, now here's the problem,
so
right?
now,
Whenever you say all the money,
on the practical argument is where I want.
Yeah, because now you're saying all the money, which implies that you've already defined a definitive amount of money that's worth compensation for all the wrongs done for, you know, Trail of Tears and eminent domain and manifest.
It's literally, I mean, they stole land. Every single dime that America has is literally, definitively off of the back of Native Americans, period. Every single dime. So the hundreds of trillions of dollars that we benefit from as being Americans, all is owed to the Native Americans. And by your previous argument of not caring about deficit spending, we should give it to them.
Certainly, something to be entertained here. It's so hard because I'm trying to root it down into reality, and it's like we're pivoting from the African American argument into a bigger ordeal now.
Yeah, I'm just trying to use your premises, because one of the reasons why I made the deficit argument is because you have to make a practical argument whenever we talk about any kind of money given to any group of people. And your premises was there is a moral wrong that was committed, and so we shouldn't, I believe there's literally a quote that you said that the deficit shouldn't matter when we're talking about human lives and the moral issues that came with, those lives. That should apply to Native Americans, and they would be owed essentially everything. So if we want to then make a practical argument, we can then go back to my previous argument about the pragmatic implications of reparations towards black people. But that was the whole point of my argument against.
To kind of center this on, so Ahrelevant's argument is essentially that, like, if we pay reparations to one group of people, how far do we run that back? So in the United States, I know that in the 1800s, the Fort Laramie Treaty was a big one where there was like some land that was, the Supreme Court ruled on this and said like the United States had explicitly violated this. This is just one of dozens of like Native American treaties that have been violated. And the Supreme Court said, hey, the United States illegally violated this. We stole like Black Hills from the Sioux Nation. And, you know, now we're going to pay them like $100 million in terms of reparations for that. But the Sioux Nation refused the money. They're like, well, hold on. We don't actually even want that. That land was never for sale. Like, you should give that back. So the question is that if we make the moral argument that African Americans are owed some money for violated promises in the past, I'm specifically referencing like the 40 acres and a meal promise, that if this was something that was violated, should we also run that back, you know, a couple hundred years earlier and say, okay, well, what about like Native Americans or American Indians whose land was stolen from them and then treaties broken by the U.S. government? How do you recompense those people? Yeah, this is Ahrelevant's current point.
So there is, man, okay. There might be a sense of false equivalence going on here if we're like, because I'm not sure the Native Americans were ever enslaved, as opposed to just having like, you know, territory relinquished and then belittled and then told to go elsewhere, right? So there is a conversation to be had here about like how much punishment was done. I get it here. It's not really a pretty thing to say here, like to quantify how bad bads are versus, you know, versus dehumanizing enslavement versus what that was done here. But regardless, though, I don't really have like a great way to hit this one on for you here, other than that, like, I generally would advise here that it's not in the best of interest to sink your own ship in order to, you know, tow other ships back to bay that are at risk of sinking here comparatively, if we imagine that in that way. So yeah, obviously don't completely destroy the U.S. as a country and its economy entirely here in order to compensate back those people. You do your best to do something for now, and maybe you can do like a kind of a cash program, a payment program. You can make it a per year thing. You can agree on an amount and kind of go from there and make it a continual, maybe generational compensation here. But now you're like really getting on. We hadn't really talked about the definitives of how much was owed on reparations and the consequences of that. Just more like on the argument of whether or not it was worth considering.
Gotcha. Just to be real quick to clarify from my point of view here, when I think of reparations, more specifically, I'm thinking of after the Civil War. I think Lincoln approved a deal where there was like a 3-point creed where there was a whole bunch of land in Southern California, other parts of the United States, Southern United States, where one of the three like creeds, or one of the 3 points of that creed was that no more than 40 acres, I think, and a mule would be given to African-American families. The communities would be ruled by and policed by African-American communities. There's a third one, I don't remember it. But this was a promise that was like almost immediately rescinded. When Andrew Jackson came into office, he gave all of that land back to the plantation owners and said, no, screw it, you guys don't actually get that at all. But that was initially like a creed that was approved in the United States, would be to award or recompense, I should say, prior slaves after the Civil War with that, essentially with that unique land, and then those communities that they would, Jackson, sorry.
If I can here, I want to go further here. I would argue this is like, yeah, definitely like a lot more in the false equivalent situation here, because the slope you're entertaining right now, Ahrelevant, is one that like, okay, because we if we compensate Black people, we must compensate everyone, and because we can't realistically, feasibly do that without collapsing our economy as we know it right now here, which again is an entitlement statement, because it's like it's an economy that was made possible by exploitation of labor and relinquishing of land unfairly and you know, whatever, raping, pillaging, whatever you want to call it, all the bad shit that happened in the last like freaking 200 plus years here. That if we can't solve one of them, we shouldn't solve any of them. It also entertains to me a similar one of like how, like, okay, if you're opposed to an implementation of universal basic income because quote unquote wealthy people would also get money as well undeservingly, that therefore you shouldn't do it at all. Seems more like a really I don't know what the word here is. Like it's a really fickle thing to say there, because like the overall net effect of the implementation would benefit more than the like consequential negligence of like some of like the outliers in the policy being implemented.
So real quick, hitting this back at Ahrelevant. So it seems like Trihex is saying that there has to be some threshold of reasonability that we can test. So like the hypothetical test for your hypothetical argument would be, it sounds like using your argument, it sounds like the US federal government could like agree to enter a contract with me to pay me $5,000 to do a job. And then after I do the job, the federal government doesn't pay me. And then I go to the federal government and say, hey, you just scammed me. You need to pay me back. And then the federal government says, well, hold on. If I pay you back, well, then I'm going to have to pay all the African Americans back. And then I'm going to have to pay all the American Indians back. So clearly I just can't do anything, is like the counter hypothetical to what you're saying.
Right. So the reason why I brought up the Native Americans specifically is because it fit the premises that so far Trihex had put out there. The reason, and the hypothetical was not meant to be bad faith in such a capacity.
So Trihex further qualified his premise, saying that the recompense of African Americans probably wouldn't lead to like the overall destruction of the country. I think it was with the sailboat tugging. I don't remember the exact words used, but wouldn't destroy the country. Like giving American Indians back all of their land would obviously like destroy the country. Yeah.
The only reason why I brought up the Native, well, you wouldn't even necessarily have to give the Native Americans back all the land. You could. The reason why I brought up explicitly the Native Americans is because he made a statement that deficit spending does not matter in relation to human lives. And so you don't have to give the land back. You can just give them hundreds of trillions of dollars. You could, if deficit spending doesn't matter. So the whole point of this is to, of course, come to the conclusion you care about deficit spending. You care about a certain amount of deficit spending. That was the whole point of the hypothetical.
I should have said deficit trolling. Be more particular here, rather than a definitive catch-all about deficit spending doesn't matter at all. Sorry, let me correct that and elaborate and say deficit trolling shouldn't matter. Shouldn't be like, entertained too much here. It does reek a little bit of a similar tactic being used by, I hate to make it like a modern thing here, but by Republicans when it comes to COVID relief for working class Americans right now.
Right.
Now the Republicans are no longer in power. Then it becomes now they're no longer in power. Now it's deficit concerning here. So it's like, it seems a little opportunistic to like use that point to take down the entirety of the wrongness that was done in the first place.
Well, so I wasn't actually trying to do that in any way, shape, or form. The whole point is just to examine that I know you disagree with the idea of giving a group of people hundreds of trillions of dollars. That's why I bring up the hypothetical, so that you disagree with it, and then we can move forward, right? So moving forward, if we agree there's a certain amount of deficit spending that is...
Real quick, just to interject here, because we're using hundreds of trillions. So when I Googled around on this before the argument, the number that I came out with, or that people seem to say a lot, is $6.4 trillion would be about what the total compensation would look like if reparations were paid out and cash was out. It would be $6.4 trillion. Yeah.
For Native Americans?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, for African Americans. I'm just because we were talking about would it cost hundreds of trillions to do deficit?
Why? I'm actually wondering how that number came about.
How do you arrive at that number, actually? I have an idea for a number, by the way, but we haven't gotten to that point yet.
I didn't look to see exactly how they'd come to the number, but I mean, there's
that's the juice, though. That's what we need to know.
I was gonna say, that's the.
Okay, well, one guy calculated it at like 60 trillion, but he was taking into account like all of the stolen labor as well, and then compounding like interest and everything. But that was for like a 60 trillion number. The 6.4 trillion number, that might just be like promised land that was owed, and then maybe the value of that land today plus inflation or something. But yeah.
Okay, so let's take a second here. Let's entertain that. Okay, hypothetically, if a payout was $60 trillion, what happens to the economy? I didn't entertain a simulation.
I believe it was 6 trillion, not 6D.
That 60 is with a crazy one.
60, yeah. If it's a crazy.
Oh, sorry, 60. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. If hypothetically the payout was $60 trillion, what happens to the U.S. economy? Do we just like completely collapse?
I think it'd be over, right? I think we print too much money and it'd be over. I'm pretty confident that's the case. I don't know enough about economics.
That's probably a reasonable guess. 60 trillion.
Yeah. What's our deficit right now at? Is it like
I think it's
22.
I have no idea.
So the current standing U.S. debt, which is like our total outstanding debt, is about 28 trillion. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sounds like that would collapse everything ultimately here. Yeah. Yep. So again, that goes back here to the whole like you can't sink your ship trying to save other ships here. So
of course.
I'd have to opt for like some kind of like, if that were the number I was agreeing to or that we were agreeing to, you'd have to do some kind of like payment plan system and like, just agree to like do shit and not completely tank everything as we know it right now here. But also acknowledge here it needs to be a pretty good number because of like this is also in part because of like the delay in righting the wrong in the first place, ultimately. Now, if you want to take a second here, while we're on this topic about like how much money is too much money or how much money is the appropriate amount of money, I do have a fun little experiment we can entertain here. To talk about that. Actually, you know what? I haven't asked you any questions here at all yet. Let me ask you here. So just to recap so far, you are opposed to all forms of direct monetary compensation. Like there's no scenario where you entertain money going to people directly. Only community investment.
No, direct cash in hand can be very useful in multiple different ways. However, I oppose it in the form of reparations because primarily when I talk about reparations, it's primarily in a capacity that I care about the current circumstances that exist and surround a group of people. And so I'm mainly in the capacity of wanting reparations to solve the problems that currently exist. And so direct cash doesn't seem to solve a lot of the problems that African Americans have, as rich African Americans have problems very similar to poor African Americans in a lot of ways. And so I think it helps alleviate it to a degree, of course, but I think the resources can be better spent and better allocated if they go to schools or investing in black businesses or black infrastructure, or if more specifically infrastructure in black areas. I think that these are going to be far better long term and even potentially short term than cash in hand.
Okay.
Wait, can I ask a question for both of you to explore related to that statement? So
sure.
Ahrelevant is saying that direct cash wouldn't necessarily solve the lion's share of the problems that African-American community faces today in the United States. Whether or not it does or doesn't solve those problems, should that matter?
To both of us, I think it does. I think it should. Yeah. Matter.
It shouldn't matter, but I'm more fixated on the consequence that without any kind of direction to point the stimulant of money towards black people to go, it would just ultimately end up being a indirect transfer of wealth, furthermore so to white people, which then wouldn't solve anything. That's the issue with it. If there's a way to like right wrongs without just being an indirect injection of wealth to white-owned businesses en masse, then I would be less opposed to that situation. That's kind of the issue I have.
Wait, can you restate what you just said a little bit for me? I kind of lost you.
The giving crap ton of cash to black people in the form of reparations without any direction to incentivize them on how they spend it would probably result in a lot of black people who lack financial literacy, to make that a very broad term to say here, would result in them just spending a fuck ton of money on random consumerism shit. And that would probably end up ultimately being a lot of product bought from generally white-owned businesses, which in exchange of suffering and all this for material wealth, as opposed to any like structural pathway to better generations of black people to come, to hopefully try our best to ultimately undo all the fucking of black people over the last 2 centuries. We're doing our best here. We can't undo history, and we can't undo all the damage done. All we can do now is try to compensate for that, and I guess try our best to simulate what modern America would look like if slavery hadn't been endured by African Americans for so long. So ultimately, the directionless spending by black people, without any kind of incentive to how to spend the money, would probably result in them buying a bunch of shit from white people ultimately, which ultimately result in like indirect wealth transfer to white people. Which that is my issue with it more so than anything else.
Just because this is a pretty important point. I'm just because it's a big one that Ahrelevant brought up. So in asking that, should it matter whether or not the money would help or anything? In looking at like another scenario, like let's say somebody owes you money and you did a job, or your parents did a job and somebody owes you money. And let's say that your living situation sucks and now you're trying to collect on that debt. Is it fair that the person says, well, hold on, even if I give you this money, I don't think it's going to help much? Is that argument sufficient to negate the fact that it's a debt that's owed to you or your family? It's kind of like the central point of this.
So it's kind of like if my friend owes me $1, but I'm already like a multi-billionaire, like,
or more so, like let's just say, well, I guess we don't even have to use we won't use hypothetical actually here. Let's say that we give like let's say hypothetically we pass reparations for African Americans, and the reparations is $1,000 to every African American. Let's say that every single African American goes and buys a big screen TV, and that's what they do with the money. Is that, even if that was the case, would that be an argument against paying what we believe is morally owed? Or if they want to spend it on whatever, do they have the right to do that, is the question.
So it would entirely depend, I guess. So from my perspective, it would absolutely matter, because I only really care about a lot of these things to the capacity that I want to help the community essentially tread water or even thrive. So if it became aware to me, because I actually agree with Trihex, if it became aware to me that the situation that Trihex is proposing was the case, I would simply change, instead of direct cash payments, I would take the same amount of money as the direct cash payment and just put it into a separate system that helps them more efficiently allocate those funds to help their lives. So if every single black person was going to spend $1,000 on a big screen TV and not help their economic situation at all, I would perhaps start looking into, hey, every black person gets $1,000 that, I don't know, goes in their 401k or something like that, or helps to pay off credit card debt or something like that. I think that would probably be more efficient to be able to help those individuals be able to pursue further. I will die on the hill of that. That is in effect quite literally taking away their autonomy to spend their own literal contractually obligated cash. So yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Were you finished?
No, yeah, I was finished.
So I guess I agree with that, because your hypothetical you're entertaining here, Destiny, requires me to accept here that righting the wrong can be done purely and just, there's a definitive monetary amount that you can quantify for a wrong done without consent. Hey, I'm gonna run into you with my car, and after I'm gonna give you 50 grand, and get over it, without consent. I'm gonna run into you right now, fuck you, you're not gonna know, and I'm gonna hit you, and then I pay you money after here.
Sure.
Ultimately,
we do that today, don't we? Right.
Right.
Well, you can sue somebody. For instance, somebody could theoretically just run you over, you lose a leg, and then you take them to court, and you get paid a cash payout for that. It doesn't get the leg back, of course, but I mean, it's some form of cash compensation, right?
I suppose here, but it's not it shouldn't be that way. That's more of a consequence X reaction scenario to be played out right there comparatively. But more so that you have to think here, okay, if we're agreeing that reparations are due for an action that was done in the past, what are we attempting to do here? The monetary compensation to me is just your easiest avenue to explore for how to right that wrong, or to the best of our ability in this case here, undo the wrong. We're trying to undo the wrong. We can't undo the wrong, so the best thing we can do at this point is consider elevating their quality of life and or the structure of their of all the oppression that they currently feel and endure. So it goes back here to the whole bettering society here. Do I agree here to give them complete free agency to spend their money on trivial consumer shit, which is just a temporary high, as opposed to reconsidering the pursuit of a better society that is doing its best to simulate if slavery hadn't existed or hadn't been performed upon by black people for so freaking long.
Wait, so I'm kind of curious then for both of you, as succinctly as you can answer, what would be the goal of reparations if they did exist? Trihex just kind of answered that. Ahrelevant, what would your answer be to that? What should the goal of reparations be?
If reparations was to be passed, I think that the goal of it should be to substantially improve the material as well as societal and hopefully mental well-being of a lot of black people that were disenfranchised and are actively being disenfranchised by systemic racism. I think that should really be the goal of reparations. I don't really see any other legitimate reason why, or any other legitimate goal for reparations, in my opinion.
Okay, and then so Trihex, what do you think if reparations were to be paid out? What should the goal of reparations be? What is the goal? What are you trying to accomplish with that?
I can think of here probably maybe 3 things that come to mind definitively. Reparations come ultimately to simulate to the best of our capability to undo the wrong that was done, in particular in context of slavery here, right? Or which is the one thing that stampedes and snowballs into everything else here, segregation, civil rights being granted officially, eventually to the best of its capability, and all the like subconscious discriminatory policies that have affected us to this day, including, gerrymandering, redlining, and all the things that are done to underpower Black democracy in this country, which is intrinsically an American pursuit, if I recall correctly here. So, in the interest of undoing the past in a simulation here, one, two, interest of bettering society, a better functioning society. Again, the whole thing about like if we were to do things like this here, it will result in like lower crime and less of the negative statistics that we are all very familiar with that are currently inflicted upon Black people. It is also I'm sorry, forgive me if I'm going a little long-winded here. Also writing the like the morally abhorrent past of the country. It's something we still haven't really addressed here yet. It's almost like entertaining a slippery slope here. If we can agree that we formally have apologized for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if we formally have apologized for Japanese containment camps, if we formally have apologized for I don't know, Trail of Tears or whatever here, then is a formal apology for slavery only enough? Should it be reinforced with action? Can you just throw in a little apology and a holiday and call it a day when it's been such a definitively destructive force in our society? And it's so much so that in certain cases, racism is baked and ingrained into intrinsically what is American culture. So yeah, definitely admitting that is part of the healing process. We need to heal. So to recap so far here on that, a better functioning society, simulating the undoing of slavery to the best of our capability here, accelerating the healing of the damage that's been done by all these negative things here. Radical one here, representing, helping the pro-representation and normalization of Black success. That is more of like a minor cultural one, but that's definitely a problem here. Again, whenever there's Black success, especially on a youth front, it's usually, it could be implied that it was done through exploitative means of like illegal activity, drug activity, drug dealing or whatever. And again, it might be people who are circumstances of their environment or whatever may be here. But the point is, there's a normalization of white wealth and power and material worth, and not such for Black people. So even then, representation does matter. We go back here to allude here to whenever those 4 Japanese American Congress members were the ones who led the charge to get those Japanese containment reparations executed back in 1988. We would representation has definitively mattered. So definitely normalizing Black success can be a thing here. Well, certainly. Right now, we have a lot of outliers of like Black celebrities, Oprah, whoever else here that show Black success is possible, but it most certainly is not normal on a statistically observable, macro level thing here. And then finally, the other thing here about that is also to compensate for discriminatory anti-democracy measures that have been intrinsic in American politics, like the Electoral College, which can be interpreted also as like being overwhelmingly implemented for helping landowners have a disproportional power of voting. But obviously, it could also be interpreted to be undermining those who don't own land, which would have included overwhelmingly Black people. So we need to right those wrongs. And I would say reparations are meant to, for African Americans specifically here, to accomplish those 5 things I said, whatever it was.
So, I mean, I think just about everything that you said is agreeable. Just about literally everything. The only thing that I can think of that I might have a point of contention on is the framing of undoing the wrongs of the past. The only issue that I really have with that is that I fear that if reparations become a thing, especially in the near future, what might end up happening is something similar to what happened, like a microcosm of what happened with Obama, where there's a bunch of people that might think that, well, you know how there was people that, excuse me, thought that when Obama was elected, like racism is over. Like we did it. We have a Black president. I fear that if we frame it as undoing the wrongs of the past, people might consider cash reparations as being, hey, why are you complaining about racism? That's what we paid you for, right? Like you can't, what are you talking about? This is what we paid you for. So I wouldn't really consider reparations as undoing the past, but more of what you said a little bit later, which is an apology for the past, right? It's an apology, but not an undoing.
I'm sorry, may I ask a question here?
Yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
for it.
I had like an alert go off that I thought I had my alerts muted here. I didn't. I heard. I didn't hear anything before Obama. You said the word Obama. Like I was trying to like mute it. I didn't even have the goddamn program open. So can you?
I got
So
dono.
basically, so the summary was just basically that like if we do like a payment of reparations, assuming that this is like kind of like trying to make good for what's happened in the past, are people going to think like, oh, cool, well, we paid out reparations, so now we're in a post-racial world. Like we don't owe black people anything. Like we paid reparations, we're done. Is essentially the irrelevance.
Yeah, I could see that actually, and I do actually. That is a very valid point to bring up, and it's one that honestly I don't think I really have the answer to, but it's one that I have acknowledged here. Would you like to segue into an entertaining hypothetical of how much money should be compensated to black people if we were to do reparations?
Sure.
Okay, we can do this real quick, just as a heads up. So we're about like maybe 5 to 10 minutes away from closing this segment, and then I'm gonna bully you guys with questions. So go,
Okay.
go for it. I'm not gonna like cut you off or whatever. Just giving you like a heads up. Okay, go for it.
Okay, so I expected, so initially in this conversation, I thought you were going to be completely opposed to cash reparations and stuff like that here. So I figured I was going to have to entertain eventually here the actuality and practicality of what compensating people would be like. So I'm using a conservative model here of, again, probably my most noteworthy example, the Japanese Americans being contained in World War II in those camps. So ultimately, if you didn't know here, just to give a quick narration here, that was from 1942 to 1946 for 4 years, and the monetary compensation was distributed in 1988. So that was done, 42 years later, and it was done for $20,000 back in 1988. $20,000 in 1988 would equate to, in 2019 inflation, to double that, about 40 grand. So we were looking at for 4 years of containment against your consent was $40,000, about $10,000 a year. Now, of course, here I'm looking at that, and I'm putting into play here a template for what you can look at for how
I'm
you
assuming
could
that.
compensate.
Excuse me. I'm assuming that's per person.
I'm sorry, yeah, per person. This is per individual.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I was gonna say,
sorry.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is
Continue.
$40,000 in 2019 money per individual. And just again, for another factor to recap on that here, the 82,200 Japanese Americans were compensated in 1988 for reparations for that camp. Cool. So the thing about that is, though, again, is that I look at that template this is assuming here we're going to equate here Japanese containment camps without consent as and a relinquish of all your property. Because keep in mind here too, by the way, that the Japanese Americans, when they were told you were given like a week's notice that you're gonna go over here, you had to sell all your shit because you can only bring with you what you could carry in. Mm-hmm. So some people had to sell their house, sell their land, sell their car, and had to sell it at a very completely horseshit rate because they had to get rid of it like at that point, or agree or tell some minimally racist American next door to watch their shit while they're gone for who knows how fucking long because they didn't know either actually. Terrible situation to be in here, obviously, but can be reminiscent of like some of the injustices that are done as well by slavery. Well, anyways, though, they were compensated $40,000 in 1988. So my template here is X amount of dollars to compensate per year of wrongdoing or method of oppression. And this, you can say slavery, you can say voting rights denial, you can say protection from human rights protections by law. Again, we have various things here: 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, Civil Rights Act of 1957, Civil Rights Act of 1963. And there's a whole lot here we look at, right? Of wrongs that were done on an individual basis here. Not all are the same level of wrong, clearly, because I wouldn't equate slavery to Japanese to the camp situation here. But regardless, though, X amount of dollars compensated per year the wrongdoing was done, plus a penalty for the delayed correction. So the longer you take to correct the wrong, the more ingrained in society the wrong that was done is done. This is also why, again, the problem, intrinsically the problem here of like the lack of normalization of black success comes from the result of the normalization of blacks in poverty, which is now intrinsically an American trait. Blacks are just, I don't know, man. This is why you see the arguments now. Black people are like, well, I don't know why the crime is so high there. I don't know why Chicago's so fucking crazy. Maybe just they got some kind of warrior gene or something. I don't fucking know. I don't know why. I don't know why they act like that. The fact that that's even a debate in American society right now, and you know it fucking is shows you the result of just like decades, if not easily centuries, of a lack of the appropriate measures done to undo all the fucking that has been executed already so far here. So X amount of money per year for per wrongdoing. a penalty on the delay of the correction, a penalty of additional money to compensate here, and then finally, this is the big one, overcompensation of additional money here to address the inevitable cultural clash and backlash of non-normalized Black success. Ultimately here, money can't solve problems, and whenever you give a fuckload of money to Black people for all the wrongdoings that were done, admittedly here, in this hypothetical, there's going to be a backlash over every other race that isn't getting their special treatment of blah, 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 blah. And ultimately, I think part of that reaction that will come culturally will be a result because of the lack of normalization of Black success that would possibly be around here if there wasn't all these like super bigoted, arbitrary boundaries that were holding back Black people for centuries here. There would be a normalization of more Black CEOs, of Black wealth, and exceptional acceptance that they can't succeed here and whatnot. We wouldn't have to go back here and have to read all this bigoted garbage about how the Negro is a horny gorilla wanting the white woman back from the first senator of Georgia back in 1922. Go back 100 years and things that bigoted were completely normalized for an elected official in office in the USA. So yeah, there's definitely a lot that needs to be done here, and I'm not sure if extra compensation of money will help do that. But I'm looking at that more as like that was more entertaining, the idea that I was banned from implementing community investment, because I thought the question, this whole debate was going to be about only allowing direct compensation of money here. But yeah, so just to recap here on that whole thing again here, it is we offer a certain amount of money per year of the wrongdoing done, plus a penalty for the delay of the correction executed, plus overcompensation bonus to help curb out the culture of non-normalized Black success here. So if we were to do all that, and we use the template of the Japanese containment camps as an example here, you would get $1,000 per year of each infliction that has been wronged, assuming here that slavery and voting oppression and other things like that that can be definitively listed against Black people as oppression are all equally bad. This is it, just for the sake of the math being simple here, right? They're all equally bad. So slavery, voting oppression, human rights. You call us right there, $3,000 per year of it happening here. And if you look at that and you add in a penalty of delayed correction, I'm using the Japanese containment camp as an example here, that would mean that you get a 25% penalty on the initial wrongdoing each year that you don't correct it. That's how you get from the $1,000 per year into a $40,000 figure by 1988. Is you just do like a static 25% of the original balance due for the wrongdoings done initially. And then finally, you overcompensate here. I don't know what you can quantify that as here, but you can quickly see here that if we include Black people or any proven definitive descendants of slaves here, we're going to quickly get into a number that's going to be pretty fucking wild.
Yeah,
because
crazy.
We are talking about ultimately here 1770. Even if we just only include slavery alone here, right? Just include only one. We're talking about 1776 to 1865, which is about 88 years or something like that. We'll just call it 90 to make it simple here. If we look at 90 years at of $1,000 each, 90 grand, plus the delayed correction here. So it's really more like it's 90 grand times an additional quarter added here, approximately. Yeah, you're looking at a pretty fat number there. Probably something along the lines of like approximately $115,000. And then whatever you overcompensate to help curb and normalize Black success and Black wealth. So let's just call that 130 grand to make it an easy number. So yeah, that would be, and you take that times a population of 43 million Black people. I don't know if you want to include like newborns or not. You want to call them over 18 or whatever may be here. I don't know how you want to handle that whole thing, but so whatever that number is right there. So 130,000 times 43 million equals, I don't know what, but that is like a sample figure to show here what could be, in my opinion, still undercompensating for the wrongs that were definitely done. But that is an idea of where you can start for an operating budget.
Yeah. So something that I guess I also kind of wanted to make pretty clear as well when it comes to the number, because that's what I was running through that same argument in my head as well. It's like, if you really do this accurately, it's going to be a really, really high number. And that high number, relative to what I think a lot of people would consider maybe it should be. I think it's a high number. I think that there's going to be a lot of people, especially that are going to really fall into the effect that I was previously mentioning, as the number increases, which is that, they're going to think that, racism is done. The more that people are going to pay, let's assume that the number was like crazy and they paid it like $50 trillion, right? And they paid $50 trillion. I'm pretty sure every single person in the United States would say, okay, I want to never hear about racism ever again, right? And then so I think that it's just kind of a microcosm of that. I think no matter how high you go, or depending on how high you go with the number, there's going to be more and more people that we're going to have to fight the narrative of if we're going to make this a thing. We're going to have to fight the narrative of them trying to push the idea that racism is finished because that's what we paid $6 trillion, $7 trillion for, right? As racism is now over. So I just really, I agree with the idea that the number should be that high. I just fear for political implementation and political cohesion when it comes to tackling systemic racism after that point, after reparations has been paid.
Very fair. What I will say there about that is this is also why, if I can be completely transparent here, I've always hated the framing of the question that was asked in this entire debate about, like, do I support direct monetary compensation for reparations? The answer to that for me definitively is no. I think it should be a hybrid at most and include a lot more of, again, the community investment and the programs that are going to help reinforce Black-owned businesses and just bring back all the a lot more collateral and power to Black people that has been relinquished for over the last 2 centuries plus. I'm completely with you there. But also your concern here about this culture concern about this will be perceived as solving racism is one that can be tackled ultimately in part of, again, more of those community investments that I would also include here, part of it being education reform. Ultimately, what I'm getting at here is about that is, like, we have to agree here. We need to abolish whitewashed American history that is currently taught. It's completely abysmal and completely dishonest here, obviously. And you need to normalize the idea that white privilege is real, because you have things like African American history being only taught as a higher education elective. Whenever it's like definitively the thing that has reshaped the entirety of American society. We're drunk off of American exceptionalism and how great America is, but no one's actually understanding the definitive history of how much rape, violence, and dehumanizing trash we as America, as a country, have inflicted on people ultimately. So yeah, we need to definitely normalize African American history. There's no way you can't overemphasize, you can't overstate here the importance of slavery. The fact that you even hear people to this day downplay the Civil War as just, it was for states' rights is complete bullshit, because clearly the states' rights were over their rights to be able to maintain their economic models that were all based around and revolved around slavery.
Yep.
So yeah, it's really fucking important, and it cannot be overstated, in my opinion. So yeah, that's to me, it's part of an education outreach thing, and we can definitely detail more programs like that would do things that would accomplish this, that would ultimately fight the attitude you bring up now here about racism ever actually being solved. That is just an ignorance thing, and we can definitely tackle that with reform that could be part of reparations master bill law that we would legislate.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, I think we've hashed this out pretty well. So on something I needed to do a little bit more clear, or what's up?
Well, actually, I mean, I do, man, I maybe over prepared for this whole shit here. I actually have there is one more thing I didn't cover here on my simulation of payments to Black people that if you want to hear my last tangent of elaboration on this, or should we just go to questions? Okay, so of course, here I was going to detail at some point in this conversation here about community investment. Obviously, because I was entertaining the hypothetical here that this question that I have to get posed here is are we doing direct cash payments or nothing at all? Was the framing I interpreted it as. So obviously, if I'm obviously very supportive of community investments in communities, and with that, sorry, excuse me, dance game. With that, community investments for me would come also in the form of not only the hybrid, right? You would get direct monetary compensation. And I would argue, yeah, clearly we can't do the direct template of whatever, right? The $6 trillion, which is not even the right number anyway. I was literally making slavery like a one-time thing. Stupid. whatever number would be, right? Obviously, we need to make it a little more realistic here. But yeah, people get money so they can actually have a we can lift up that poverty floor, because right now we have a really high income, like a very high like wealth ceiling, and a very low poverty floor. It's a very wide thing. We want to kind of like bring together that way everyone has like a more consistent standard of living. No one's like really in poverty and shit like that. So with that in mind here, what I'm looking at here is that how I would use the direct cash payment proposal to do the thing of bettering a better functioning society here that would result in more Black-owned business that would help normalize Black wealth. I would advocate for there to be 0% interest loans that would initiate Black people to be able to start up or sustain their Black-owned businesses. I think that's a really good thing to look into there, and ultimately, whether you want to if you want to qualify via having a certain amount of Black percentage within you on a DNA blood test, or if you want to say that anyone in areas that all definitively suffer from Black criteria or definitively like Black statistic based criteria, like low income, high adoption of social safety net programs, poor performing schools, low budget schools that are like victim to high amounts of Black population, low state tax revenues to be able to make their schools better, high crime, whatever criteria you want to use is definitively a Black oppression based statistic. Anyone in those permanent residing areas, or people who are like in the suburbs and minorities who are out in like gentrification areas, can opt for some criteria of determining their Blackness in one way or another. I'm not sure how you would do it obviously here, but they can all then go for these 0% business loans to help hyper accelerate Black engagement in our economy, and that can be done by local officials. We can build a certain committee to oversight these things being done on a per community, per city, per local division basis. And ultimately, of course, here the problem is that you're giving Black people who probably lack a definitive amount of financial literacy the power to just do these like really risky, stupid fucking loans. I would opt here that such a thing would be in addition to a standard reparations amount that would be, again, it'll get them out of their poverty status and into more of a stabilized condition in the first place here. Call it $10,000 flat, call it whatever you want, honestly. But you would also, if you wanted access to these kinds of loans, you'd have to take a definitive financial literacy course, or opt to just, get paid to attend higher education to get all the more qualified to then pursue pitching your business ventures for these 0% interest business loans. So either way, you're giving people the incentive to like pursue higher education and do better for themselves, which will be paving the better way for generations of Black people to be able to like not be in the situations of a really low end of society where they're more victimized to the lure of crime or bad things like that. And you also give them incentive here to become more financially literate anyway, something they would probably acquire if they ever had the opportunity to have money. Again, all you ever get whenever you have no resource is the burden of how expensive it is to be poor in the first place here. So, yeah, that's my proposal there. We do similar to what you were saying here earlier in your opening statement. Relevant is that we definitely are pro Black-owned businesses, and we're pro Black business, and we're pro in my words here, pro normalizing Black success.
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't really think specifically about that point when this debate was being brought up, the normalizing Black success, but I was really I really think it was an apt choice that you or point that you brought up, especially when in regards to reparations, because I think the framing around it would definitely shift dramatically if we normalized Black success more than we do, because it would be seen as reparations, I feel like, would be seen more as an investment in the Black community if Black success was more palatable to more people, rather than a cash dump into poor people, which it feels like it's being framed as amongst many opposition and even average people. It's more of like okay, here it's like a welfare type, here you go. Whereas I think if we had normalized Black success, it absolutely would have been seen more of what it is, which is an investment in Black people to literally achieve what they should have achieved had these systems not been in place. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the situation there too, though. So now we're going into like the practicality of the application and the reception of it and the consequences of the culture that will come from it if it were ever to be implemented. And man, there's a lot of interesting tidbits to dive into there, because the thing is, right now, if we base it in actual reality here, there was a proposition in the state of California to have a grant done to fund a study looking into the effective ways to consider reparations at all here. Like there was
wasn't there a federal one, HR 40 or something like that, that was done, that was like, it's favorable, I believe, amongst most people to investigate the lengths at which, like, reparations, it was literally like a formal study on reparations. I think was it HR 40, something like that?
Did it go anywhere?
No, it's favorable amongst, they were talking about it on the debate stage. There seems to be a political, like, drive to at least to want to investigate how it would work. So yeah, there's definitely political motive to look into it, at least.
How do I want to dump this thing here in chat. What chat are we in right now? We're not
I don't think this room technically has a chat, so.
I'm just gonna DM you to hear you. I'm just gonna throw it in, like, throw it at you, and you can I don't know. This is particularly what I'm referring to. I don't know where to throw it at, though, so I'm just gonna throw this here and there and everywhere.
Sure. An LA Times article: California task force will consider paying reparations for slavery.
Oh, that's actual consideration to pay, not just investigate?
Yeah, this is a state initiative, though, not a federal one.
Of course, yeah. Yeah,
and the thing about this too is that there's we've already seen direct cash. I didn't even bring this up actually here, but when I was looking into this whole thing here, there's already examples of direct cash. Not saying that because it's been done in the past, it's like automatically worth doing here, which is more of like a historical significance that the city of Chicago had already in 2015 actually compensated $5.5 million to 100 people, majority of which were black males, mostly black males and black females here, where they were tortured and harassed by a particular sheriff of that town back in the late 70s and early 80s. They were able to track down that this one particular sheriff was so corrupt and bigoted and or addicted to belittling black people that he would continue. He had a quote unquote midnight squad, midnight crew that would go around at midnight and just, like, you know, take people and beat the shit out of them, and in some cases suffocate them until they passed out, hoping to extract information from them about, you know, what the Negro is doing, you know, in some kind of like spooky activity or whatever here. They were ultimately able to like compensate them all in a total of 5.5 million. I forget the amount though. It was like 5.5 million across about 100 people, and also offer the relatives and descendants and family lineage of them complimentary higher education relative to the city of Chicago and other services like that. So we're not foreign to direct compensation on a local level. So if the state of California wants to look into this further here, that would we've already seen this happen for Chicago definitively. And I would argue that happened in Chicago because of, again, representation mattering here and having a local body of a lot of black people understand the significance of the wrongs that were done in the past. Okay.
I think we're kind of circling on. I think you are both pretty much in agreement over what should be done. It seems like a fair summary of both of your points is that some form of compensation should be given to African-American communities, not necessarily in the form of cash reparations, but in something that can like demonstrably improve the living conditions of the majority of African-Americans that are being recompensated, right? Or compensated.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I guess that wraps that up, and then we have an agreement there. So I should have been more careful in my original posing of this question. So typically when
I sent you the link, by the way, to the Chicago one if you want that.
Gotcha. So usually I guess the thing that I really wanted to tease out in these arguments is like, should reparations be treated as like a form of like federal stimulus to African-American communities, or should it be treated as like the repayment of a debt? Is kind of like
100% stimulus, in my
yeah.
opinion.
And then it seems like both of you guys kind of fall more on
Yeah.
the side of like it should be treated more as like a stimulus kind of thing. But yeah, okay. Fuck, I should have been more I should have been more clear in that. I guess I kind of want to throw a few. I just want to throw a few arguments out because I guess I'm curious how either of you would address these. So revisiting back the idea that a promise was made. There was like a specific promise made to black labor, not black labor. I'm sorry, to black like slave labor, to black people that were slaves in compensation for their labor. There was a specific promise that was made regarding like land and territory and whatnot that would be given to African Americans, to slaves and the descendants of said slaves. And then that promise, the U.S. government basically walked back on. I feel like there's an argument that whether the money stimulates the economy, whether people spend it appropriately, whether it helps anybody at all or anything at all, that money ought to be paid just on virtue of the fact that it was promised to be paid. Why would, like, let's say that in any other circumstance, let's say that you find out that like, like 100 years ago, there was some contract where your family was promised some money because somebody was never paid their wages for a lifetime's worth of work. And you found this out and you were able to enforce this contract. Like if somebody was like, oh, well, you don't need the money now. Like, does that make it okay to not pay out what was owed there?
I wouldn't necessarily say that makes it okay. So in my given example as being, I would say perhaps slightly more antagonistic than Trihex towards direct cash payments, the reason, the difference I would make is that it's not necessarily that you wouldn't pay the person back, but that you might pay them back in a specifically different way.
Yeah, but that, so just pushing back again, the paying somebody back in a specific way seems to be like a very patronizing and condescending way to do it.
Yeah.
Let's say that somebody, let's say that somebody works for me for 5 years and I never pay that person for their labor. And then at the end of it, they're like, yo, you enslaved me. I want to be paid. This is bullshit. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to give you a $10,000 gift card to Target for clothes. I'm going to give you a $5,000 gift card to Kroger's for groceries. And then I'm going to give you a $20,000 investment fund for your education. Like, that person would probably be feeling pretty fucked because it's like, listen, I don't want you to tell me how to spend my money. Like, you owe me this money. I'm working for money, not for you to tell me where I have to spend it. Like, why should you be allowed to dictate how a person that you owe like cash to, or in this case land, or the cash equivalent to land, why should you be allowed to dictate how they spend their money?
I would say in this scenario, it would be kind of different in the case that we have in the United States with black people, because we've uniquely fucked over black people in their capacity to be able to have the level of financial literacy that we would want them to have to be able to make the decisions that we would want them to make in the appropriate manner, to be able to lift themselves up from their financial strata, as well as I would like to make the argument, especially if we talk about the numbers similar to what Trihex and you proposed with the 6 trillion, or sorry, more specifically, you cited with the 6 trillion. I mean, I think we can all agree the amount of marketing majors are foaming at the mouth to begin targeted ads towards black communities and things like this. So it's not even just like a normal level of consumerism or marketing towards these groups of people. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars.
I understand that consequentially speaking, like that targeting could happen. But when we say like uniquely fucked, like I think there's some stuff that's like not necessarily that unique here when it comes to like a concept like intergenerational wealth. Like it seems really silly to think, man, like, are you really going to get $300,000 because your great-great-grandpa was a slave? Like, that seems really fucked up. But the reality is that type of wealth transfer happens in white families all the time, right? You know, my great-grandpa, my great-great-grandpa, was in oil or something, and, my family has millions of dollars, and now I get this, blah, blah. Like, we see that type of intergenerational wealth transfer happen all the time. It just doesn't happen in the form of, like, here's a cash payment. It's a lot more subtle than that. You live in good houses, you go to good schools, you've got good connections, you inherit some money because you get it when your parents die, they buy things for you, right? So I guess it feels a little bit bad to me that when it comes time to when it comes time to pay somebody back, I guess, for a promise that was made and then never delivered on, or just for past wages, you're like, now all of a sudden we're worried about all this. Well, hold on, wait, hold on. well, we give them all their money. What if people target them poorly and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, what if they do? I mean, it's their money. It's not really our decision necessarily to say like, well, if you get this money, you better make sure that you invest it well. Like, it just feels unfair to do that to African Americans whose families have been like destroyed for years and more importantly, forget the destruction part, who just like had labor stolen from them, like literally stolen from them, to not repay them because we're worried that they're not going to spend the money in the most responsible way possible, I guess.
Right. So I feel like an apt analogy would be like if a white person, let's say, is having an inheritance, right, towards their child, should the child not have a financial literacy test or what have you? Or am I just going to run with the assumption that they know how to spend their money, whereas like I'm not running with said assumption when it comes to black people, just based on entirely upon the color of their skin? Which, yes, I would ultimately have to agree with the idea that because of the systemic things, so specifically what you're trying to get at is it is owed to them. They have the right to indiscriminately spend that funds however they so please. And I don't necessarily disagree that would be just and great, but I think that ultimately speaking, practically I would make an argument of practicality more so than morally when it comes down to this. I would want to secure black wealth more than I'd want to secure the morality or the shaking of hands.
The exercising of absolute agency in the money they spend.
Yeah, I think I think I would be willing to subvert a level of autonomy in order to ensure that black people have their wealth secured.
Yeah, I agree with that. Trihex brought up a really good point earlier, though, that kind of made me reconsider this point. In that, like, let's say that you have a building that has like one room in it, and let's say we want to expand this building, and let's say that if we were to expand it normally, where we all work together and, you know, do all that, we could go from 1 room to 20 rooms. Or let's say that we could enslave half the population and we could go from 1 room to like 500 rooms. We can make it way bigger. It seems like the argument that you're kind of making now is that like, well, we did so much in this country on the back of slave labor and so many white people got so rich. Like, hold on, like, I don't think it's realistic to like pay them back because like we grew so much off of them. Like, slave labor was so good for so much of the country that like, I don't know if it really makes sense to pay them back now because it was so profitable. And it feels like in that way, you're like getting triply fucked because it's like, fuck, like enslaving my ancestors was so profitable to you that now you can't even like consider paying me back for, you know, like all the wages that were stolen from my family. Now I feel like triply fucked here, you know?
Yeah, it's completely the situation. I mean, it's a similar situation with the Native American example, right? Not necessarily a perfect parallel, as both groups of people have different histories, but like it's just that, guess what? We just can't pay back the Native Americans what they're morally owed just because it's too much cash. Get fucked. It's literally that situation. It sucks, but that's the way that it works. We can try our best to be able to help them to the best of our ability, you know, but like ultimately speaking, yeah, that's it literally, there's no winning for black people. It's a big L. There's no ultimate like end goal, like winning, getting the big dub, because yeah, the foundations of this country was absolutely built by black people, and it's like, is everything that was built on top of those foundations then like are dividends owed to us? Some would argue yes, to a degree. I would argue yes, and it's like that's a lot of fucking money. And I don't think there's any way we're gonna see. I don't think there's any way we're gonna see anything near that kind of substantial repayment. So yeah, it's just an L.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can here, there was 2 points I wanted to elaborate on that there. One is that this is also why we advocated for a hybrid system where you would see in the agency of money to be spent on what you're being paid back, point that Destiny alluded earlier with all the big boy gift cards and all that. And that's why I advocate for both the betterment of society via community investment, these some kind of like, you know, pretty accessible pro-black business loan program of some sort that operates at a local level here to ultimately better these black communities and whatnot, and also see a direct cash stimulus just so that they can also just the quickest and most effective way possible. I'm sorry, the quickest way possible better their quality of life, because clearly it would be better if slavery never existed, but we can't do that. So the next best thing here is just to throw them cash right now. And I even then, yeah, maybe some cases there would be doomed to consumerism. That'd be their agency here. But I would also offer complimentary, again, here you can offset that with like complimentary financial literacy courses or teachings when you receive your money. You can opt to take that course possibly, or something, I don't know, something like that. We can elaborate on that a little bit further here, but I do advocate for that hyper system just because we were trying to cover as much of the bases as possible to do give them the agency to spend as they want to spend, but also accomplishing the parts of better pathways for society and Black people and Black communities in general.
Sure. I think that like, if in terms of that, if there was like a middle ground that I personally would be like, oh, I think this is like a good middle ground, I could see it as being like, instead of getting a cash payment, you're going to get a voucher that can be spent on a house. Because as dumb as it is, houses are people's generally largest investments, and it's a good transfer of vehicle for like intergenerational wealth. So if we are going to tell people to make good decisions, blah, 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 at the very least, like, okay, well, fuck it, like get a big ass fucking house or some shit, because that's something that transfers from family to family and can like help a lot in terms of people, I guess.
Absolutely. Because I was going to bring my last point about this this convo we had so far here right now at this point of the debate or podcast is that I should get the citation for you here, but 60% of wealth in America is inherited. I recall that being a pretty jarring stat to swallow. And it's like, okay, well, damn. Well, now you see why. Can you just imagine, if someone can get that from me here real quick here, if you could just imagine if that is even relatively true, if we're anywhere near 60%, even was like 50% or whatever right here, right? It's like, holy shit, dude. No wonder if the exploitation of slave labor led to the direct rise of so many white families, you can clearly see where being born into the RNG pool of being born to a white family is tenfold advantageous here because of the just amount of wealth here. Yeah, when daddy's like 95 years old and he's sitting on like I don't know, a house and then a summer house and 2 cars and shit like that, and there's like no debt to the estate generally because he paid off his debts a long ass time ago. He was just coasting off of retirement funds to enjoy the last 20 or 15 years of his life. Yeah, clearly you got a lot of stuff come to here. You're not even worried about like how oppressed you may be financially, but rather you're worried about the petty shit, like how much of the money you're going to get compared to all your other siblings who are going to have to fight over the pie. It's literally a very, very like white world problem to have. So yeah, there's definitely that cannot also be understated either. The just innumerable amount of wealth that is transferred generationally.
Yeah, that
both
was
in assets and literal cash.
That was something that I had. This is kind of a little bit of a separate thing, but also kind of touches on what you were talking about. This was also kind of one of the things that kind of bothered me when I heard so many people, because there's a thing that was going around where there's a lot of people saying like, I'm doing college all on my own. I'm doing, I'm making it all work on my own. But like, and I mean, that's fine. You can say that and do that or whatever. But I also think there's a separate categorization for like people that do it on their own, that have a fallback plan, which is, going back to their parents' house, or, defaulting on their parents to be able to possibly pay their college debt if they can't, right? The only capacity that they really mean doing it on their own is because their parents said, you know what, let's see how you try it on your own and things like that, in comparison to some people that are literally like, well, you know what, I'm taking out loans to do this, and if I don't do this, I'm just stuck with the debt, and I have like nowhere else to go. And that's like
1,000,000%. And anybody can be like, I could tightrope walk as good as any professional if you put like a safety net right underneath the rope. Like it's not very scary at that point. Yeah, but people will act like walking a tightrope with a safety net right there is the same thing as doing it without. Like just having that fallback can be massively alleviating and give you some room to fail. And a lot of people seem to not understand that experience for sure.
Yeah, that's why I would always allude back to the anecdote of like, could you imagine if you could just go to college full time and be able to afford to just like, be told the lucrative appeal from your parents, as long as you make good grades, I'll pay for your education. And it's like, oh shit, okay. As long as I apply effort to the very goal I'm trying to achieve right now, you'll pay for everything. Fuck yeah, okay. The problem is, that's a very, broadly speaking here, white privilege option to entertain. Literally. Certainly one I never fucking had.
Yeah.
So, and it goes back here to that generational wealth ultimately.
Exactly. Here. That's why I really brought it up, was the generational wealth thing is pretty much, it's very largely built on that, backbone of your family, having that safety net, So
Yeah. So you got some questions?
Well, no, I think I kind of poked, I think both of you, because I think we're generally in agreement here. Here's a random question I have for you. We didn't really get, since it wasn't too much disagreement, we didn't like jump into the weeds too much on this. Here's a question for each of you. I don't know if either of you would consider this. How would you figure out who gets reparations? If we were to target this based on like descendants, like
this is fun. Okay, actually, I had a thing prepared for this too. We never got to it. So you're asking here, like, if we're agreeing to give reparations on X amount and X and Y method to Black people, to African Americans, how do you determine who, like, how Black must one be?
Yeah, so I guess to qualify this,
slaves.
Yeah,
so what are the metrics for it?
To qualify this initially, we would be talking, I imagine, obviously, we would be talking about like African Americans as the descendants of slaves. If you immigrated here from Africa, you're not part of this conversation. Past like 1960 or whatever, right? You're not part of this conversation. So like those kinds of reasons, and then probably not if you weren't like the descendant of a slave. If you immigrated otherwise, you're probably not part of this conversation. But then past that, yeah, how do you figure who gets? How do you divvy up compensation? Is it like your great 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 grandfather would have been owed? I don't even know how far back you could even reliably trace a lot of this too, because of how lost all the records are. But let's say you were to figure out like your great great grandfather should be owed with interest, with the land that he was promised, with the wages, about $10 million. Let's say that you chase down that entire Black family tree and there's like 100 people. You know, does every single person just get $10,000, or is it like, how do you? Yeah, this is a pretty like detailed question. I'm curious.
I'm about to flex here. Let's fucking go. Let's fucking go. So we actually have a historical example of implementation of this situation here. I have two for you actually, because I did the research on this whole thing here. So first thing first here is that the Hawaii natives, and there was an act that was done in 1922. Let me get that for you real quick here. Yeah, so there was due to colonization of Hawaii, the population and density of Native Hawaiians went from like over 300,000 down to only 22,000 by 1920. So 150 years prior to 1920, it was like a lot, and then it dwindled down due to like the disease that was brought on from all the colonization and shit like that. Well, anyways, here the point is that there was a thing called the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920 that established a land trust exclusively for Native Hawaiians to be able to lease a reserved allotment of land for $1 per year for up to 99 years. And the criteria was you had to have a 50% or higher Native Hawaiian ancestry via a blood test. The problem here, of course, is that, like, you know, if I, Native Hawaiian, married or, you know, had sex with or had kids with like a non-Native Hawaiian, that descending, you know, person's going to be what, 25% or whatever, right? So it's like, the problem here is that due to the criteria of maintaining that land that you were getting for all the wrongs that were done from all the colonization or whatever the fuck, results in you having to prioritize over like procreating and for pure lineage ultimately. There's a problematic metric over finding a purity test to determine for compensation for things like this, because the generational, due to how that law was written, ultimately the generations onward had a situation where their offspring were not 50% Native Hawaiian, and they had to choose one of two options here: either move away because there's already a backlog of overdue Native Hawaiians who are wanting land because they didn't have enough land to even give away the first place here. So there already was a backlog waiting for people to like die and relinquish the land so the next person can actually get it. Because there was already like an affordable land crisis going on with the growing population in Hawaii throughout the 20th century. But also you either have to like move away because you literally, the offspring, you're going to die because you're 75 and you're going to die in 10 years or whatever the fuck. And your offspring's not 50% Native Hawaiian, so they can't even like opt to even continue your lease. Or you must sell your land lease ticket to another Native Hawaiian for an off-market price if they're willing to pay for it at all here. Meanwhile, again, your offspring still has to move away somewhere else off that reservation thing. So there's already been an example of historical logistical problems of like a paywall of lineage and shit like that to opt to distribute any kind of beneficiary distribution for reparations here. So we have that issue, right? The other one, oh fuck, what's I gonna say about the other one here? The other one here is that I'm just not really sure. How do you even enforce here descendants of slaves? I think the other issue here is the logistics of the fact that like I'm sorry. I'm sorry, remember now. The other issue here is that so there were actually two things done for the Japanese containment camps. The now famous direct monetary compensation reparations, that was done in 1988. But that was done again in reaction to those 4 Japanese American congressmen pushing for that to happen, because the initial thing that was done in 1980 was a thing that passed that allowed those who had their property relinquished, wrongfully destroyed, stolen, or abducted to then file. They were now allowed to file lawsuits if they can prove that their shit was lost whenever they were forced to go to those camps in 1942. They can then be compensated for that. But the problem there was that the IRS didn't have great documentation of everyone's assets back in 1942. And so they didn't have those to look at. And you're asking these people to like have receipts for shit from 40 fucking years ago to prove in court that they are due for compensation for these particular things. Ultimately,
gotcha. I think
there was an attempt to like get a lot of shit done, but like it was something like only 30 million out of the attempted 130 million plus was ever awarded to people because the documentation was so bad. The point I'm getting at there, explaining those two examples, is that I would argue that the historical documents logging lineage of families for slaves is probably fucking terrible, because I would imagine white folks didn't consider it very important as slave owners to keep track of like the legacy of their fucking cattle and property that is black slaves. They don't care. They treat them like fucking property. They probably what branded them with their own branding and moved on with it. They probably deliberately relinquished them of their identity. It's why they chose that's why they chose and believed that the black person or the Negro had an inferior brain and wasn't worth wasting time on educating, because they weren't even capable of being educated too.
Yeah, I think just as a clarification point on this, so 1870 was like the first census after the emancipation when African Americans were listed on documents. So that would probably be your starting point, and then you have to figure from there on out if they were enslaved or had been enslaved or not, I guess. But yeah, that would have been that would be like your earliest starting point where you could start from there. Did you want to say something relevant?
I mean, I don't know how accurately even that documentation, well, yeah, I agree that's going to be your starting point, how accurate that documentation is going to go. But also something else to note is would I, as somebody who, this is going to sound weird, but it's definitely something that to be considered, is every single person who is a descendant of a slave going to receive the exact equal amount if that was the...
I think you would have to, I think if we were doing this in any reasonable way, you would just have to average together all of the slave labor and go from there. Because there's no fucking way you're going to be able to determine like people that lived in this part of the country worked harder than these or whatever. Like I don't think that's going to be possible.
And if you averaged it out, are we assuming that you'd split it evenly amongst every single slave and then like their descendants?
If I may interject real quick, you have to ask yourself here, because I feel like you're looking at this more in the framing of like, I need to quantify the stolen labor definitively and that labor's monetary worth and then give it to the person. Whereas because of the unique circumstance of how much time has passed, in some cases, 7 generations of people have already died before we were even getting to correcting this problem here. You must ask yourself instead, what are we trying to accomplish with the money? What is the money trying to do? And you say, okay, if I'm trying to like better their quality of living, we instead say, okay, let's tackle that. Let's do a study on the definitive minimum to have a definitive good quality of life living. And again, we can look at an example citation of the study done here that generally happiness can be is a threshold behind making $75,000 annually. And you can look at that and say, you know, okay, cool, we'll give you, I don't know, something near that figure, or whatever, right? I think you gotta rather than looking at quantifying the slave labor value, we have to instead look at what we're gonna do on a better of modern society basis.
Well, and kind the only reason why I asked that is because there is genuinely people that are not black that are descendants of slaves, and so I was wondering if those people would receive the same amount of money as, like, for instance, you or me. Who, well, I'm assuming I'm a descendant of a slave. I mean, I don't know my bloodline. Maybe
I have a pretty cool opinion about this, actually. So ultimately here, I'm actually not really a fan of this whole like figuring out how black one must be to get compensation.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Kind of, to me, just it's reminiscent of the paper bag test back when segregation was around. You know, you put a paper bag, brown bag next to someone's skin. If they're darker than that, you know, colored fountain you go, colored dining room you go. If you're brighter than that, okay, whatever. You're white enough. You know, just completely rooted in ignorance here. If we're looking at a certain qualification of like how black one must be, it's trivial for me to enforce here a 1/16th, 1/32nd threshold or whatever the number of increments is going to be here, because we're talking about 200 years of descendants. We're talking about again, as many as 7 generations of overdue compensation to be done, and ultimately, even if I am whatever 1/64th black, who fucking cares, right? Because like, what if I am like 1/8 black hypothetically here, but I passed black? I still have to suffer through what I would dub the black experience of discrimination, of statistical disadvantage, of oppression, and things like that. We can all reinforce the statistics here. So if I'm being treated like I'm black, what fucking difference is it here in any way?
I'm actually curious. What if you're genuinely white passing, and like, what if there was a white person that like literally fucked a slave? This is gonna be like 1 in a million.
Well, wait, we don't have to say 1 in a million. What if there was like a slave owner that raped like a black slave woman, and then they had offspring?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, this is actually very common, by the way. Very common. But I should say here, I remember reading here, and forgive me, I don't have citation for it here, but I remember reading here that even though it was very common for a black person to be accused of raping white women in segregation times and whatnot, and often it resulting in things like lynchings and whatnot, that very often it was actually, or more frequently, it was the white slave owner that would rape their black female slaves way more often than the other way around. It's because of the overwhelming power dynamic there that was going on. That shouldn't be too surprising, no, honestly. But
and so the whole point of me like bringing that up is I was just curious because you talked about when I was referencing somebody that might not be considered black or what have you. You were talking about like black passing people. I'm wondering what your opinion would be if like there's somebody who's been in like 4 generations of their bloodline have been white passing people, but they have a descendant of a slave. Like, is it just... Are we cool with that? I mean, I think ultimately speaking, we have to be cool with that. If we agree that you can't, yeah,
I'm very relaxed here. Earlier when I was bringing up my implementation of how I would execute this, if you recall here, my criteria were 2 things, either or being met here. You live in an area that is victim to a lot of the problematic black statistics that we can all cite are forms of oppression for black people. If you reside in these areas, I would argue that you have been victim to the black experience, and I'll be able to like do something with that. And or you can, if you don't reside in these problematic areas, what we would now dub the ghettos that were spawned from racist bank institutions and redlining. You would, if you're a minority, if you're a POC, if you're a black person or whatever, and you're not in those areas, you can then I don't know. This is where it gets a little bit ambiguous here, but it's like, I guess you just determine how black you are. I don't know. I don't really see like a ethical way to paywall how black one must be. Yeah. But I suppose here, as long as if you have some black in you, sure, why not?
It seems like you'd have to qualify.
On a macro level here, what we're doing here is we're just like we're doing an injection of like hardcore UBI to lift up that poverty floor that's way too low. And admittedly, this is more this is partially now related to the economic policy that we've been under here since Reaganomics in general. So forgive me for making a little bit of a pivot here, but ultimately you are kind of dealing with that issue too now. So I don't really see a negative in overspending to fix that issue as well here by not really enforcing a strict paywall for the barrier to be black enough to get reparations.
I think on this, it's a function of what you think reparations are to do. Or what they're for. So if reparations are to recompense people for slavery, then it probably matters how, quote unquote, how black you are. Yeah. If somebody is like literally like black mom, black dad, both slaves, child, and then that child has a child with another person who's black mom, black dad, was a slave, and that whole family is like pure 100%, that they should probably be compensated more than like, slave, non-slave, and then the 128th or 128th slave descendant. It like would probably be more fair. If you view reparations as a form of like recompensating somebody for like lost wages, for land that was promised. But if your goal of reparations, which both of you seem to be more on the same page, if your goal of reparations is just to like generally uplift, you know, black communities in the United States, then doing that type of purity test is probably not good. And then also for a second issue would probably also serve to fuck over mixed race people in the United States, who already kind of have a pretty shitty experience. Now get to have an extra thing over your head where it's like, listen, man, like not only do we tell you you weren't really black, like we got like 10 times more money than you because you're definitely barely black. Like you're not enough a descendant of slave. You don't have the same lived experiences we do. Yeah. And that would probably further serve to like create that division even harder. Okay, well, this has been a fun conversation. This is a difficult one. These issues are really difficult for a variety of reasons. Morally, it's hard to say where this starts or stops, especially when you bring up Native Americans as a result of prior injustice. Pragmatically, it's really hard to say. We've just spent the past like 10 months like fighting tooth and nail for $600 fucking checks. So it seems pretty unbelievable that reparations would ever even be considered. Like, I don't think that HR 40 bill passed, did it?
No, I think it's just favorable amongst a lot of people to even go through.
And that bill is literally just beginning to create, to begin the investigation to figure out if reparations are even appropriate, right? So we're not even at that point yet.
Yeah, we're not even at that point. And also, I might have been citing the wrong one here, but the California thing I was citing, what it was the one I'm thinking of here, might have been the different one I linked you here, but the one I was thinking of was actually meant to be a proposal to allocate a tax on something or redistribute tax revenue from something into funding a study to look into the effective ways to do a state-induced reparation. It wasn't even to do it; it was to do a study to look into how it'd be effective. To then take that, obviously, the conclusion of that study, and then propose it later on. And
you're talking about the California tax force?
The call to make the study happen and be funded didn't even go anywhere. That's how behind we are in that current situation.
Are you talking about the California thing?
Yeah, the one I linked to was not the one I was thinking of, actually.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, because I read that, and apparently that was just a task force that they threw together to start to look into that. So yeah, these are pretty difficult issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, listen, I appreciate the fact that both you guys showed up. I'll throw a poll in chat to see if anybody was moved or interested in this at all, or not interested in this, or if their opinions changed at all based on conversation. I posted a poll in H chat. I'll try to be a little bit more clear next time in terms of like teasing out disagreement. The hard part is that like for a conversation like this, it feels like to find somebody that's like completely and totally against it, it almost feels like I have to like find like a Candace Owens-esque character or something.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I should have actually tapped fucking Suspect Sushi. I don't know if... Because I bet that guy would take a much harder stance.
Oh my god.
Yeah, not only that's a lot more civil than I thought. I was expecting like a full-blown no, and I thought we were going to like... The thing I'm happy about here is we did actually entertain do you support reparations, yes, no, why, and how. We actually entertained the how quite a bit. That was the part that I thought was the most fun to debate and discuss, was how we do this. I thought we were going to be stuck on the why should we do this the whole time here. We didn't actually spend much time at all here on me having to justify a hypothetical no position.
Sure.
I thought I was prepared to do that too and be like, okay, well, I'm happy the IQ was a little bit higher in this situation. We didn't have to really go down that rabbit hole of degeneracy, if we will.
Gotcha. All right. Well, prior to this conversation, it was about a 64-36 split, with most people being against cash reparations. Almost twice as many were against it. And after this conversation, which was pretty civil and not too heated, it seems like it's about 52-48. So it seems like more people have moved in favor of cash. Now, that's still the majority are against, but 52-48 is a lot closer than 64-36. So I guess that's good. People are considering new ideas and everything. So,
you know what we should have did? We should have spent like an hour just going over like traumatizing humanity rights slave facts. That's what was missing here. We should have just went over like what happened 100 years ago, much less 200 years ago. That probably would have deterred us a little bit more, actually.
Yeah, I think also a pretty important thing to think about is reparations also for like potentially people that were more recently discriminated against, not just exclusively like slavery, like Jim Crow and redlining-esque reparations might be also pretty appropriate, not just exclusively slavery, but maybe that's a little too advanced for the general public at the moment.
Sure.
But I don't know.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate the conversation. We will catch you guys on the next show. I want to do another one of these soon. I guess at the end of this, I should make a call out at the end. Okay, wait. Well, actually, before I do this, do you guys have any?
Do we like plug ourselves?
Yeah. Closing words. Like... Plug yourselves. Where can people find you? What do people know you for? I'll start with Trihex because you're on the left. Go.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? I'm Trihex. I'm the face of your favorite global emote, Tryhard. Currently, still #1 on Twitch right now as of January 2021. Holy shit!
Wait, how do you feel about vaccines?
Say it again.
How do you feel about vaccines? Careful. No, I'm just messing with you because Gutex was saying some crazy shit. No, go. I don't want to get your email room. Go ahead.
Y'all can catch me over at my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Trihex. You can also catch my tweets on twitter.com/Trihex. I have been playing games, been doing a lot more variety hacks, getting back into podcasting, getting back into these comfy cross content creator contamination, where me and Destiny have been long overdue to do some reminiscence. True. So maybe this is a start of things to change and to come. We'll have to see here. But either way, I'd love for y'all to come by after this is done and tell me how I did. And if you have any more follow-up here, I'll be more than happy to take a little Q&A session after party over there very soon. So thank you.
All right. And then Ahrelevant, where can people find you?
Twitch.tv/Ahrelevant. I am up late night, all right? Late night. Pacific Standard Time, about 1 a.m., all right? The king of night streams. Stream pretty much every single day, all right? I like talking politics. And listen, if you disagree with me, be ready to get in Discord, all right? Discord or ban. That's how I like to run my community. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right, awesome. And listen, I appreciate both of you guys. It's been fun. I'm going to cut this and then say a few words. And yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate both of you for coming. Thanks for having the conversation. Thanks for staying civil. Yeah, you guys have a good one.
Do you want me to stay here, or are we actually free to go, or like?
No, you're free to go.
Party convo need to mute for here, or like? You just spit off from here. So before I reveal accidental confidential audio shit or whatever.
I've got an important conversation that I have to run into after this, but I'll be back if you want to chat afterwards. So yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'll just. No, because
just ping me if you do, then, because I'm gonna do after party on my stream.
Yeah, sure. I'll be back in like 30 minutes. So
if you want to talk, let me know. Just ping me and just slide in my DMs.
Yeah, sure thing. I'll message you when I get back. All right. I'll see you guys later. All right. Peace out.
Later, y'all.
All right. What's up? Okay. Before we fuck. On the last one of these debates that I did, I was very, very, very strict, where I told the people, like, listen to me, okay? You motherfuckers need to disagree or else I'm going to kill both of you. I was super anal on that. I wasn't as anal on this one. I think I was a little bit too vague with my questioning. I thought that, like, when I put, like, cash reparations, I thought that would be, like, more like, oh, like, pay cash as opposed to, like, other types. But I should have been, like, more clear with, like, how, like, exactly what it was so that we could have had, like, more disagreement and then more argument, I guess, rather than kind of, like, circling around an agreed point. So that was kind of my fault. Although I think I asked enough questions that we kind of like got to an area where there was some disagreement. At the tail end of these, I need to include like a call out, a question, so that I can get people for the next one. Okay. The next one of these that I want to do, and I want to do this one within a week from now, okay? I'll run this in 2 days if I can find somebody to do this conversation. I want to do a hashtag force the vote debate. I want to get somebody that is in favor of forcing the vote on Medicare for all, and I want to get somebody that is opposed on forcing the vote for Medicare for all. There's a lot of talk right now over this conversation topic. Jimmy Dore, Kyle Kuklinski, the Bad Faith podcast, and then you've got like people like AOC and other people that are saying we shouldn't be forcing the vote. I'm super duper curious. I want to get two. I imagine it needs to be two left-leaning people. It can't. I don't really care about Republican opinion on this. Nobody knows what y'all are doing right now. You guys are in shambles. But I think I want two left-leaning. Like, I'm guessing it's probably going to look like a very progressive / lefty Dem versus like a more moderate / established Dem. I would really like to see two people that are very capable at handling this topic. The people that I'm looking for on this are going to be like anywhere from small to medium sized or greater content creators. So my hope is that like as long as you pull, we're gonna do a hard cutoff on Solinome. As long as you're getting 100 viewers average on Solinome, I'll consider you for the show. That's what your goal is. So for the clip, if you want the call out, okay? Are you a left-leaning content creator that has a strong opinion on whether or not we should be forcing the House to vote on Medicare for all? If you get at least 100 concurrent viewers and you've got a strong opinion on being for forcing the vote or against forcing the vote, send Destiny a DM on Discord, and I might consider you as being one of the 2 people to debate the topic on episode 2 of Destiny in Moderation. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed. Fuck, you guys weren't supposed to see this screen. I fucked up. Ignore you ever saw this.